Is to talk about writing the Common App, specifically the personal statement. And just to give some context about myself, so I started at Townsend Harris High School in 2013, graduated in 2017. As I mentioned, I've been working at Kweller since 2016. Since then, I then went to undergrad and medical school. I'm currently a third year medical student at Weill Cornell. So just to talk about the writing process in general, I would say the writing process consists of a few different phases, and I think it's really important for everyone to consider and acknowledge these phrases and know that each of these phases can take different amounts of time, and that's why it's really important to plan accordingly and start early. So I've broken the writing process down into a variety of phases or stages, and I'll be discussing all of them here. Um, the first is brainstorming, the second is drafting, the third is structuring, the fourth is editing, and the fifth is polishing. So to begin with brainstorming, oftentimes this is what can take students the longest amount of time as they are trying to pick or solidify an idea or topic that they want to cover. As we will go through the Common App personal statement, there are a variety of options that you can choose from when choosing how you want to write your personal statement. And so it can take students quite some time just to decide what topic they want to write about, which question they want to answer, and how they want to answer it. Um, the second phase is actually drafting. And again, I encourage students to recognize that this phase can also take quite some time. Oftentimes, you may have multiple versions of the same idea. You may have multiple ideas that you want to draft. And so it's important to allocate enough time for this. The third sort of process or the third aspect of writing that is really important, especially in something like a personal statement where you have a limited amount of time in which you are trying to convey something about yourself, both personal and professional. It's really important to have an adequate structure um, for the actual piece. So, what I mean by that is the same story can be told in many different ways based on the chronology, based on what kinds of tools you use as you write the story. And so, it's very important that you recognize that because you can say the same story in different ways, you want to figure out the most ideal way to tell your story so that it is clear, creative, and also engaging while satisfying the prompt itself. The fourth aspect is editing. So I think editing is hopefully by this point at when you're at the editing stage, it is a little bit faster because again, that's why we've had these multiple phases so that the editing stage in of itself is not necessarily what's taking students the longest. But it's very important to take time to edit um your work. Editing not only gives you clarity in your content, but it also just provides you with a way to make sure you're satisfying what the prompt is asking of you. So sometimes as we're writing, drafting, structuring, and brainstorming, we can lose sight of the prompt or we can go over a word count or be under a word count. And editing is really going to be the key that makes sure that you satisfy the prompt itself. And last but not the least, polishing is really when you are preparing your essay for submission and strengthening it by using things such as stronger word choice and grammar variations to just make your writing more sophisticated and polished. So with this, I would say these are kind of the various phases of that someone should go through when writing something as consequential as a personal statement for college. Now, just to talk about, the common application in general. So, I just want to contextualize like the timeline for students because I think a lot of students and parents can sometimes have the common application personal statement deadline just sort of surprise them. So, from my understanding, Again, it's been some time since I've applied to college, but from my understanding, early decision applications are due November 1st. And for regular decision, those applications are due right around the New Year's time. And I just want to sort of contextualize that as full-time students, it can be very hard for students to find the time to write this essay as they are managing classes, as they are managing extracurriculars, part-time jobs, sports, etc. So I really encourage students to think about the um, prompt or think about ideas that they have for the college personal statement during the summer after their junior year. Again, this does not guarantee or this does not lock anyone into a specific prompt or essay or writing, but I do think it's helpful just to start early and just start thinking about what you may want to write about. Because as we saw in the last slide, there are so many different phases of writing. And if you're able to advance to more phases, that would mean you are likely going to be more productive. And with Thanksgiving, the winter break, New Year's holidays, the winter holidays, I think it's quite difficult for students to be able to manage their time and families to manage their time appropriately. And as someone who's been working at Queller since 2016, we've definitely seen a lot of last minute students wanting assistance with their essay, and it's very, very hard for anyone to assist. Just considering how busy people get. So my biggest advice would be to start early. What this also does is it takes the pressure off and allows students to experiment. So what I mean by that is, like we mentioned earlier, the same idea may have different versions or you may have different ideas. Drafting early and thinking early allows you to experiment and play around with different ideas, even if you will not be using those ideas for the actual essay. Point four or advice number four that I have is to define the limitations and specifics of the prompt. What I mean by that is it is very important for students to look at the prompt critically and understand what will successfully answer the question and what will not. A lot of times, students have very good ideas, but they're not placed under the appropriate prompt. And so either that is a matter of the story not being appropriate for the question, or the fact that students just need to choose a different question. And we'll go over all the questions that we can answer and go over actual examples today as well, which I'm hoping will be the most helpful to everyone here. The next few steps for the common application obviously involve drafting, getting feedback from a few trusted people. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of times I see students asking way too many people for advice. And this is something I've been guilty of as well. We all want to give it our best shot. But sometimes the more people we ask for advice, sometimes we can get conflicting advice and it's ultimately not constructive. So I would say choose 2 to 3 people to give you advice on your personal statement and not necessarily on things like grammar or punctuation. Those are much more simpler things that you likely can receive assistance on just through a word programmer like Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Or if you have a question about a specific vocabulary word or grammar, AI is also being used more and more as a tool. But I think where it's really helpful to gain feedback is for things on how clear your writing is, how structured your writing is, how much it engages the reader, etc. And this is advice that only one person can give another. And the rest of the stages involve revision, editing, gaining feedback, polishing, and perfecting. Now, these are the common application prompts that I would like everyone to take a look at. How many of you have seen these prompts before? You can use the chat feature. And how many of you have seen these prompts for the first time? As of yet, I've only received one person saying they saw these prompts before. Okay. So someone just messaged me. This is their first time seeing the prompt. So I think this in of itself is a really helpful exercise because when I was drafting my common application personal statement, I looked through every single prompt and I narrowed down what type of prompt I think would work best for me. So, for example, I know that just the type of person that I am and the things that I like or the way that I like to approach any type of writing, prompt number 7 is likely a prompt that would have been too broad for me. Share an essay on a topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written or one that responds to a different prompt. For me personally, I'm someone who likes and values structure. So I knew that number 7 would be a prompt that I would not want to think about. So again, going through these prompts in advance and kind of fine tuning and paring down the prompts that you're interested in will help you in the long run as you're planning this. Number and then going through the rest of the prompts and just deciding which prompt is most interesting or which prompt is something you think you have an idea about will just save you time in the long run and will just allow your brain to start turning its wheels and thinking about an appropriate question you want to answer. The next few slides, I want to talk about and demonstrate to people how the same prompt can be used for how different scenarios can be used for the same prompt. And the reason that I want to do this is because I think a very big pressure that stops students in their tracks is that they feel that they need to have, a very sort of mind-boggling, life-changing cure to cancer type of response. And that I want to say is not the goal. The goal in their common application should be to be personal, to be personable, which are two different things that I'll explain, and to be professional. So what I mean by that, I'll break those down one by one. Being professional. So what I mean by that is there are certain boundaries that I would recommend students not cross. These include these include I would not recommend students discuss something extremely um personal or extremely traumatic within their lives or their parents' lives. I think it can be difficult to talk about these subjects sensitively, and it can be difficult for someone to anticipate that they will not be negatively or inappropriately influenced by the content that you have to share. So while I encourage students to, be honest and vulnerable in their applications, I do not recommend them sharing something that may be so personal or so, traumatic that it can possibly leave a question as to whether they are prepared for the academic rigor of college. And if anyone has a question about this, we can chat separately. But I think it's very important that students recognize that this is a component of the application that is going to be used to judge the student's personality, to judge the student's writing style, and to ultimately judge if the student is a good fit for the school. And just keep those things in mind. And that's what I mean by professional. In the lines of professional, I also recommend that students not choose something or not write about a topic very politically charged just because at the end of the day, you don't know who's reading your application on the other side. And this is a process in which, human beings are involved, and all of us, whether we admit it or not, have our own biases. Now, I had made a distinction between being personal and personable. So, being personal in your common application, like I mentioned, you don't want to be too extreme and too personal, but you want to be, giving the reader a glimpse of who you are outside of your resume. I would say the biggest mistake I see students make is they will simply rehash everything that is written on their resume in the form of multiple paragraphs. That is not the best way, and I strongly, strongly believe by this that is not the best way to approach the common application. Students have the ability to attach a resume. Students have the ability to elaborate on the activities they've done in the activity section. You do not want to waste your time and space by repeating the same activities in more detail. It will not help you. The goal is to be personal in that you are sharing something about yourself that would be of interest, and the goal is to be personable in that you want to come off as a likable person who has interesting thoughts and who can just contribute to this college community. Um, Being personable is a big part of just adapting to college, and colleges want to see that a student can, successfully be part of the community and just be a person who can contribute to the campus through extracurriculars, through academics, etc. And so being personable is something that you also want to reflect. Now, in light of all these things, number one being personal, number two being personable, and number three being professional, I want to go through how you can rethink certain prompts to showcase your personality and your experiences in a way that is not necessarily, simply confined or limited to school. So, number one, prompt one. This was a prompt this is a prompt that says the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you? What did you learn? So I could choose to write this about, a test that I failed or a class that I failed, and I could just rewrite um sort of everything about my experience as a response. Why is that not the best thing to do? Well, one, it highlights something negative about you in the entire essay. So while, you should have some type of growth element or reflection element in your essay, ultimately your essay is focusing on something that's a little bit negative. So that's just not the best way to put yourself across to someone who's evaluating you for college. The second thing is that is something that again is sort of limited to the classroom space. So, what are some things that we can think about to rethink or reimagine this prompt? Well, the first thing is we can think about what defines the word obstacle. An obstacle for me might not be an obstacle for someone else, and an obstacle for someone else might not be an obstacle for me. So, this goes to show that just even in of itself, the obstacle term is very subjective, and this opens up the floor to many, many different types of responses a student can write. So for a student, one obstacle can be, I don't know how to tie my shoelace, and now I have to. That now is a challenge. How do you tie your shoelace? And the rest of the story can be about your experience navigating that. While that may sound trivial, that's actually quite interesting and takes a fun and experimental approach to the question while still keeping it professional, personal, and personable. So this goes to show that it's not about what you say, but how you say it. And in order to determine how you want to say it, it's important to rethink the prompt and rethink the way you want to define obstacle, challenges, setbacks, and failures for yourselves. So now I'm going to go through different common application examples that I want to highlight. These are either my own or from students I've directly worked with. And I'm highlighting these examples to show everyone things that we can focus on and things that we can think about as we're drafting the essay. I'm hoping this is going to be the most informative part of the discussion or of the seminar today because I wanted to show everyone different and diverse examples, and in this, I want to emphasize that there is no one right way to go about this, but what it does take is time, practice, effort, and just again time. So I'll just let I'll just give everyone like a minute or so to read just these first three paragraphs. And then I'll just discuss certain aspects that I think this essay has done well. And then we'll move on to the next essay and just to again see different examples on what they have out there. So once people have finished reading the first three paragraphs, they can just put it in the chat. That way I can move on. Okay, so I've gotten a couple of messages that people have done, finished reading. And again, I would put the whole essay up, but I don't think that would be the best use of our time because I would love to discuss sort of what has been done well. I think that something this essay has done well is structure. Just looking at the paragraphs, there are no paragraphs that are overwhelmingly long or overwhelmingly short. I think just visually, this gives this essay sort of a very nice and clean look. Now, with respect to the content, so this essay is tell us about a time when you use your inner resources to overcome an obstacle. What did you learn? So I think this essay takes a very sort of interesting and not super serious, but also not super serious and not super sort of obstacle in the traditional sense, but I think it comes up with like a good story focusing on things like family, focusing on, just nature and focusing on really little things that they describe very well to make clear this is an obstacle. So this goes back to sort of our understanding of rethinking the prompt. If it's very important that if you are using this prompt to answer the question, you make clear what the obstacle is and you make clear what your inner resources are. So what they've done a good job at making clear what the obstacle is. I wouldn't normally think of a snowstorm as an obstacle, but the way they describe it is very clear, right? They start off by saying, we hate the snow. Um, this left us stranded, matters seemed bleak. Um, just these sort of word choices make very clear that this for the student was an obstacle. You know, the torture continued, panic ensued, all these things are emphasizing the severity of the situation for the student. Again, this for someone else, this may not be a big deal. For someone else, this may not be an obstacle. But the whole fun of the essay and the reason why the essay comes across as good is because they have personally shown what this obstacle means for them, and the reader is become invested. Now, the inner resources part is another like positive thing about this essay. They've made really clear, their role in this scenario. It's not just about their family, it's not just about the weather. It's about what they're doing in that circumstance, right? I dialed 911. I realized I need to get help. Um I opened the trunk. I, removed all clothing items. I wrapped socks and scarves. These are things that, again, not necessarily are, like I said, life-saving, cancer curing things, but it does a good job at making the student front and center of the narrative and showing their inner resources in a creative and interesting way. So, I think these are what these essays have done really well. I've gotten a message to scroll down, but I can't and won't be doing that because I need to move on to other essays as well. Um the next essay is describe a place or environment where you are perfectly content. What do you do or experience there and why is it meaningful for you? So again, I'm going to just share a few paragraphs from this talk. Sorry, from this write-up, and then go through sort of what I think the essay has done well. And once people are done reading, they can let me know. Great. So someone had messaged me about, this essay, and the student did really well using sensory details, and I agree. Again, this prompt, right? The whole goal is, and what I'm trying to show everyone is not only can there be diversity in ideas, but there can be diversity in sort of content and writing style, and there is no correct way to go about this. And this essay, I think, does a great job at sensory details, at descriptions, at using dialogue. So in the last essay that I showed, there was no dialogue. In this essay, they use dialogue strategically, um, in that they don't have, chunks and chunks of just dialogue and other people talking or themselves talking, but they use dialogue to sort of move the story forward, to bring interest, to involve themselves in the narrative. I trudged through the water in my ginormous waders, 8 foot long turtle trap. I peered into the waters. Um, Turtles were caught. We tagged 5 turtles, and they set the scene. Where is this happening? Black Rock Forest Preserve. And then, just describing the scenario. And, the best part about this essay is they describe happiness and being content without ever using the word, I am perfectly content. The prompt says, describe a place where you are perfectly content. This essay successfully answers that just in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, right? With the moments described. They're, having fun, they're having adrenaline pulsing, they're excited, they're doing, this interesting task of tagging turtles and measuring them. They're enjoying the cool summer weather as it's brushing against their hair. They're walking around with 40 people, hiking, watching the stars. They're screaming, they're having fun. And all of this is answering the prompt of describing where they're content, but it never uses the word content. So I feel like I really wanted to show this essay because everyone says to students, show, not tell. And I feel like that is a very vague thing that students really struggle with understanding. But to see this real life example, I hope is helpful in everyone recognizing how you can show an emotion, or how you can show a feeling, or how you can show sort of a thought process without telling it explicitly. Um, I had received an request to show conclusions, and again, for people's, not only privacy but to protect their academic work, I'm not comfortable sharing their entire essays, but I'm sharing bits and pieces. And for the next 2 pieces, I wanted to share conclusions. So, this is an essay that someone wrote to answer a prompt. I think that was tell us something very important about yourself. And I'm just gonna give people. I did mute myself, but what I was saying is that I hope the last thing that I people heard me say is that I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to read the essay. conclusion. So let me know when you're finished so I can start discussing it. But I was silent intentionally so that people can read it. And once people are done, let me know so that we can start discussing. Okay. So people had said sort of that they want to see the conclusion, and I do think that's a valid point because ideally in the conclusion, what you should be doing is focusing more on, again, what I meant by the show, not tell. So this essay, presumably this essay is talking about the student's identity and culture as a Cuban American, but the most important thing is that they take that forward and really talk about what that identity allows them to do and what that identity, makes them think about. So it's not just, the literal. It's not just, the literal backyard pig roast and the literal salsa dances. It is that this culture allows them to recognize bias, gives them the new abilities to have a language, makes them understand the importance of feeling that people belong, makes them aware of their privileges, makes them aware of their experiences, um, makes them aware of the importance of diversity, and that they want to use this diversity to empower themselves and others in college. Um, and while doing that, they want to never forget where they come from, right? So um, while like progressing in higher education while sort of, rising in the ranks and working in communities, they want to always, sort of never forget where they came from. So this kind of goes to show that that reflection is something that really should be done in the conclusion to really hit the hammer on the nail or the nail on the hammer. Point being is this is where you really want to nicely wrap up and have like a futuristic outlook or have some type of, outlook that looks beyond just the literal story. Does that make sense to everyone? And please, if there are any questions, you can use the chat feature to do so. Okay. Um, this essay prompt is describe a topic, idea, or concept that you find so engaging. You use all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What do you do to or turn to when you want to learn more? So I'm just gonna have everyone take some time to read this as well. Okay. Um, Great. So someone messaged that they are done. So I'm just going to quickly start sort of again describing what I think this essay does well. Again, like I mentioned in the first essay we read, I think they do a great job at just paragraph structure, right? Not paragraphs that are too long, not paragraphs that are too short. Um, the structure moves the, um, essay along. The prompt is describe a topic or idea or concept that is interesting, makes you lose track of time. Why does it captivate you? So again, what is the point of this? The point of this is that you are choosing something that captivates you. For me, I would have never thought of dreams as something to answer this essay because for me, dreams are not something that are like active that I engage in, right? Like for me, if I were to read this prompt, I would think, okay, like maybe I can talk about a sport or a hobby or a talent that I have that I really enjoy that I lose track of time. So maybe for me, well, I could put like cooking or baking or maybe things like that because that is something that I find interesting. But this student uses such an interesting concept of dreaming and of the fact that dreaming makes them lose track of time. And it's so interesting because the way that they describe it makes us think, wow, the student's completely correct. Dreaming does make you lose track of time. We dream when we sleep and we have no idea about time. When sometimes we're daydreaming or we're sleeping and we're dreaming in the day, we again lose track of time and our minds are completely transported to somewhere else. So this just goes to show the importance of really breaking down the prompt before you even think about ideas and using your own experiences or creativity to answer the prompt. That creativeness doesn't mean the prompt needs to be something or the essay needs to be something that has a completely novel idea. We all dream, but the way you talk about it is what has its novelty. So, what does the essay do well? Um, the essay structures the answer to the question well. They start off by bringing us in the moment. They bring us to, directly in the scene. They directly bring us into the dream itself. Then they sort of contrast that immediately with the Zoom pandemic and just COVID-19 and how that impacted them. And further, they kind of take this unique spin and say that dreaming was a way for them to reconnect with almost themselves or others while they couldn't reconnect with people physically during COVID-19. And the rest of the essay just talks about why dreaming is so engaging and why it really serves that purpose that it does for them. Okay. Um Now we are going to read the last the last essay. And for this, I also am going to be focusing on the conclusion. So if people could let me know when they're done reading this, that would be great. And apologies, I have to zoom out a little bit because it's covering two. I'm pretty sure people can also zoom in directly on their screen on their end. Like I mentioned, unfortunately, I just want to make sure that I'm zooming as much to allow it to be read in one pass. So you should be able to zoom in on your screen end, even if I can't zoom in. Okay, for the interest of time, I'm just gonna quickly walk through this conclusion. Um, So I think what this essay does really well is this essay takes, a concept that is probably familiar to all of us, this feeling that they don't belong or this feeling that they don't have friends. And it describes it in a very almost like wholesome and simple way that demonstrates sort of the power of connection between two students. Um, the student talks about the fact that this sort of pastime or passion with the Rubik's Cube is a way that they sort of spend their time when they're alone, right? Everyone else is talking, they don't have friends, and you don't use a Rubik's Cube to distract them and to put those thoughts away. Now, it was hearing that sound with someone else and that familiarity um, that made them, interact with one another, and what's motivated them to build that relationship and build that friendship. Um, this is not something that I would say, is a very like uh foreign concept. We all have had that experience where we've had to put ourselves out there. We've had to make friends on our own, regardless of how scary that was. But the unifying factor of the Rubik's Cube and that sort of being at the crux of the essay is what I think is nice about this piece of writing, is that it's able to tell a story through a focal and through a fundamental sort of metaphor, or through like a fundamental piece of imagery, which is that Rubik's Cube. Um, and the prompt for this, I believe, is not written here, but probably the prompt for this can probably be any of the following. So it can probably be prompt two. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental. So, the obstacle here would be the loneliness, and they can talk about how it affected them, what they learned. What they learned is that sometimes they have to take that first step. Um, this can also be prompt five. Discussion, accomplishment, event, or realization sparked a period of personal growth. So this event, or realization was that, they have to find these commonalities and they have to put themselves out there. Um, or it can even be prompt seven, share an essay on any topic. So again, the reason that I wanted to close with that essay is another thing that I think can be really helpful for students to realize is it's very likely one essay can fall under multiple common application prompts. So that's why my sort of recommendation to even begin the common application process is to start early, experiment, and define the limitations and specifications of the prompt and rethink every prompt. I remember what I did when I was applying to college. I had a paper and a pencil and I wrote out every prompt, and I wrote out sort of all the different ways I can interpret the language used in the question. So, all the different ways I can define an obstacle, all the different ways I can define a success, all the different ways I can identify a background identity, the different ways I can describe what it means to have a belief or idea and what it means to challenge it. For someone, challenging a belief or idea might mean debating it. For someone, challenging a debate or idea might mean to disprove someone else's thought or to disprove someone else's idea. For someone else, challenging can be as simple as asking a question. Challenging can be as simple as saying you don't understand something. So it's very, very unique and specific to every person. And the more you dissect the prompt, the more you will realize that there are actually many, many different ways of answering the same question. And it helps you think about different scenarios that apply to your own life too. Does that make sense to everyone? I wanted to leave the 5 minutes, or 4-ish minutes, for people just to let me know any question that they have about the process that I can answer. Someone asked about getting prompts per school. That is more so, I think what you're referring to, what are called the supplements, which is what my next session is going to be on. Aside from the Common App personal statement, every school has can require supplements, which are specific school specific questions. Those you can see what when you add the school into your common application. And then they will prompt you to answer those questions before you submit the application. For the conclusion, I would say, the conclusion is probably something that I think students should spend the most time on because it really, again, you want to have like an outlook that is mature, futuristic, reflective, because ultimately the conclusion is sort of the note they're ending your essay on. I would also say that make sure sometimes students like go really, really broad because they want to sound impressive and ambitious. And sometimes students have this tendency to just want to have the inclusion cover a lot of different like bases, or they want to have the conclusion be really broad and abstract so that the student sounds impressive. What I would say is make your conclusion grounded in your story. So make sure that it's a takeaway from the beautiful story that you've done your best to illustrate. But at the same time, make sure that you kind of reflect. So, for example, like here, right? They've reflected and they've done a great job and talking about, diversity, equity, privilege, um, biases, but all of that is rooted in the same story that they discussed earlier. We're still talking about Cuban American identity. We're still talking about the student's family. We're still talking about the student's grandparents. So they're not going super far away from the story and focusing on very big and abstract ideas like communism, equity, diversity, inclusion. They're illustrating those ideas through the story. Um, and someone asked about having the examples. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, I am not going to be sharing these examples in their entirety, because I have seen situations and where people have plagiarized, in fact, my own work when I have shared it to them, just for inspiration. So, yeah, unfortunately, these can't be shared. But with that, that brings us to right around 8 p.m. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. But if not, I'll be signing off shortly. And I hope that, again, this PowerPoint and going through the basics was helpful. And more importantly, those specific examples I thought and I hoped would be of help to everyone because I don't think we see a lot of specific examples online, or the ones that we see may not be the best reflection of sort of what schools like these days. And so, yeah, I just hope that this was helpful to everyone who attended. Someone asked about how early they can apply, when is a deadline. Again, this depends on the type of application you're submitting. Early decisions have a different deadline than regular decision. I would recommend that this information can best be found online. Um, Certain programs also have their own deadline, like Macaulay Honors and certain bachelor's in medicine programs that are dual degree. So again, I can't give a blanket answer to that. Would recommend checking with the school or the common application. Alrighty. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So again, thank you everyone for their time. And I will be ending the meeting now. Have a great rest of your night and hope to see everyone soon at the future sessions.